going to give you two examples. One, because AI can do something that no human can, which astonishes us. It's not replacing humans, it's surpassing us by far. And this is an example that we worked out with our group. And by the way, here at Doheny Institute, we are a reading center for the world in terms of fundus imaging. So we have a tremendous amount of imaging, and so people have come to work with us. And I say us because I'm chief of ophthalmology at Doheny, but not because I did this research, so I shouldn't take too much credit for it. But Google comes to us and says, "Can we use your pictures? We'll do the algorithms." And in doing so, they said, "You know, of course, that you can tell the difference between a man or a woman by looking at the back of the eye." To which I and several other ophthalmologists said, "Nonsense! Of course not. I can't look at a fundus photograph and establish the gender." They said, "Our computer can." So they basically ran it, of course, having all this data against gender, and they found out that after their training set, when they did it on the test cases, they were 97% accurate at establishing gender. Now, a couple of bounds. One is it had to be after puberty, and two is it couldn't have pathology. It didn't work if you had a lot of macular degeneration. But a normal fundus examination, it's accurate to 97%. I am accurate to 50%. It's an absurd thing to think that a fundus looks different from men and women. One of the first issues, of course, that comes to mind that always has to be dealt with in AI is how does it do it? You got to be careful. Sometimes it turns out to do it in a way that's not meaningful. I'll give another example of that if you want. But in this case, it turns out that it does it in a very legitimate way. How do we know that? You can't ask the algorithm to explain itself. There is no way of doing that. But what you can do is mask certain areas of the eye. So we masked the optic nerve head, took the pictures and asked AI to identify, and AI got it perfectly right. We masked the blood vessels, it got it perfectly right. But when we masked, not the fovea, but the macula, the area around the fovea, it botched it up. So we know which portion of the photograph mattered the most, that collar just around the fovea. Even after knowing that, and knowing that it was so accurate, when I look at a fundus, I cannot possibly tell you if it's a man or woman. 97% is what the statistics showed, but the engineers at Google said, you ought to go back and find those 3%. They're probably wrong. And it wouldn't surprise me if biologically there was closer to 100%, and there were other issues that translated to 3%. So this shows you AI at its best. It can do things we can't do it instantly, and do it very well. But here's the example that's going to help you with your question. When a patient shows up in an emergency room, especially an emergency room in a community hospital, not a major academic center, and often they're faced with an issue. The emergency room doctor, an internist or an emergency room specialist, has to decide whether it's papilledema. If there's papilledema, there's likely to be brain swelling, and they need to get an immediate CT or MRI and look for hemorrhage or tumor or something in the brain. If, on the other hand, the disc is normal, they don't need to do that. It's a decision that has to be made with great precision. Typically, in an emergency room, they can't tell whether there's papilledema or not, but maybe AI can. So in a project just completed, they looked at 880 patients who had real papilledema, established later on with MRIs and lumbar punctures, and compared it to almost a comparable number of people who had funny-looking discs. And they use as the gold standard two of the most prominent and skillful neuro-ophthalmologists in the world. They're both out of Emory, Nancy Newman and Valerie Vius. And then they asked AI to do it. And AI did a little bit better than those two ladies did. A little better. Of course, AI went through 890 pictures in 8 seconds, and the ladies took something like 12 hours. But that might seem to answer your question in terms of efficiency, but it doesn't really answer your question in terms of patient good. But I'm telling you is that when a person shows up in the emergency room and gets turned away because their headache is just a headache, because there's nobody there who is a neuro-ophthalmologist, now you can see how powerful the AI might be. Because it shouldn't be compared to the world's best neuro-ophthalmologist. It should be compared to the typical physician found in an emergency room, where it's doing what can't be done. So yes, ophthalmology is leading the crowd.